Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. Today we are covering ISCA's legislative priorities, how to be prepared for the 2018 legislative session. And leading our discussion today is Susan Langen, Cedar Falls School Counselor and ISCA Board Advocacy Chair. And we will also be joined by the ISCA lobbying group, the Capital Group lobbyists. So I will turn it over to Susan. We're going to keep everyone on mute. And if you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand and we will unmute you throughout the discussion. And I'll give it over to Susan.
Okay. Well, welcome to the webinar. And I think we have about 5 people on, and I think some of the people hopefully are going to be able to share some things too, because they have a little bit more information about some of the topics that we want to talk about that will be hopefully included to help us, Iowa School Counselor Association and school counselors in Iowa be a little bit more active during this session. So, Britt, can we get some of those other people to be able to talk, or like Robert and... Whoops.
All right, Robert is unmuted and David is unmuted, but he's self-muted, so when he's ready to talk, he can pop in.
Okay, perfect. And then Cindy Swanson, is she on too still?
Yes. So
Cindy, if you have things that you would like to share too, because you have lots of good information from ISCA, please jump in and let us know. Followed by the pound or hash sign. Whoops. All right. Perfect. So, first of all, I want to introduce our Capital Group lobbyists. I know Pete McRoberts, I don't think is joining us, but Robert Mulqueen is with us, and then Jim Obradovich is supposed to be joining us by phone. But I just wanted to give them a shout out, and they'll get an opportunity to visit a little bit more about their perceptions of how the session is going to go, and what are some things that we can do, and then we will have more of a time. I do have some slides in there about how to how to write letters to the legislators and things like that. What we might do is skip through some of those and talk more about some of the Future Ready Iowa and some of the things that are going on and how we can be more involved. So I don't know, Robert, are you on? Robert? Okay.
He's on, but I don't think we can hear him.
Oh, maybe he doesn't have a microphone or something. I wonder. Okay. Well, we'll keep going, and then if maybe he could call. Maybe he stepped away for a minute. So, all right, well, let's keep going, because I want to make sure that we have time for discussion and kind of knowing what's going on. So kind of what I started off with is just making sure that we are aware that ISCA does have legislative priorities set this year. This was something that we did in October in our board meeting, along with the lobbyists, and talking about, again, what are our issues and what are the things that we need to be doing at, Iowa School Counselors Association's priorities. And one of the big things that the lobbyists told us, again, that funding would be an issue this year, because obviously there's not a lot of money and there's been a lot of things that are going on. So one of our main priorities is to preserve the funding for any programs or initiatives which affect school counselors, at all the levels. And so that's something that we are hoping to make sure that happens. And then the second one, the continued advocacy for the use of accurate title, school counselor rather than guidance counselor, as well as the understanding protecting the role. School counselor more accurately reflects the comprehensive proactive nature of our role. And this is a really important one, because I think if you remember Sue Shermer talking at the conference, if you were at the conference talking about it's a perfect storm right now, there's so many things going on in the state that school counselors need to be stepping up, and they need to be knowledgeable and making sure and also getting involved in some of these things so that we can, continue to have a voice and be able to represent the different things. So some of the legislative positions that we have, those are coming out of last year's priorities, but I think mostly the legislative priorities are the most important things. And does anybody have questions or anything about the priorities or? Okay, well then we're going to move back to the PowerPoint. And then some of the other things that are on here, and these are more for, if you really don't have an idea of legislative process and things like that, I tell you, I've learned a lot in the last 3 years, just about, how bills are put into process, how, when are times that they should be, we should be contacting the legislators and different things like that. There's a whole page there that you can look at. There's just some different things that you can review. And then the guide to communicate with the legislative terminology, which there's a whole bunch of things there too. These are things that I picked up. The National Education Association has a great website, and I picked up a lot of these things from them, but it's very helpful. And then you can also watch floor debate as it happens during the session, and you can watch it live stream, which that's really interesting to watch some of that stuff. I've never, when we go down for Visit the Hill Days, sometimes there's things going on, but it's really interesting, especially when they're pretty hot topics. So those are just some things to get started and make sure that you're aware of, aware of the ISCA priorities. And then the second page, the second side is, here's what else you can do. The first one is invite your legislator to your school or your meeting, and obviously, get clearance from your administrator to do that. But we've actually done that a couple times. Last year, Pete Junior High, one of our junior high folks, they kind of got together. They invited Walt Rogers, who is one of our Republican folks here in the Black Hawk County area, and then he was also a big part of the education committee. So they brought him in and they kind of gave him, different groups that they could talk to. They talked to teachers, administrators, they had kids, come in and visit with them. And it was a whole afternoon, I think, of time, that he spent at Pete Junior High. And it was right before the vote for the collective bargaining. And, he just said, oh, no, nothing's going to change there. And then, of course, Monday, they voted, I think, Monday or Tuesday, and it all changed. But it's really good for them to, come to your school and meet you and, have something planned. Or, we also have, here at Cedar Falls, we have K through 12 counselor meetings. And so a couple years ago, we invited all 3 of our legislators to a K-12 meeting, and then we had them talk, but then we also shared different things that we were doing and promoting our role and also helping them understand our role, because I think, again, that's going back to one of our priorities, that people don't always understand our role, and we need to make sure that we're all doing the things that we need to do with the recommendations from some of the things going on in the state. So invite your legislators to your school or meeting. Obviously, by the time, during the session, it's really hard, but they usually are home on Fridays. So you could invite them on Fridays to come and just, spend a little bit of time with you and get to know them a little bit more. The other thing, to contact your legislator later by email. I have a whole slide on, how to do that and what's the best way to do that. Mark your calendars for February 20th is the Visit the Hill Day that we do with Iowa Association for College Admissions, counselors. That we will have more information and more link to sign up for that on February 20th. But that, if you've never been to that, that is such a good day. And it's really, I've shared with different groups before, that is, when I first started going to those Visit the Hill Days, they were not, that was not something that I looked forward to and almost kind of dreaded. But now that I've done it a couple times and the morning is spent in sessions, we have people come in and talk about what are some of the topics, and then also how to talk to legislators and things like that. So then we have lunch, and then in the afternoon we actually go to the Capitol and visit with the folks who are representing you, and you get to see a lot of things. Plus, the lobbyists have been really helpful for the Visit the Hill Day, because they also can share, can make sure that we're getting invited to special meetings, and then also meeting people who are working on certain bills that have pertain to school counselors. So if you and you can also bring kids to that. We brought students more and more, and that's been really helpful, because legislators like to talk to the students. But we'll give you the Iowa ACAC gives a $50 travel stipend, and so please use that and bring students if that's a way you can get out of your building that day. But it really is a great experience, and we need as many counselors there and as many students there as possible. The next thing is attend a legislative forum. Our Cedar Falls Education Association held one of those just last week, and had our local folks in, and it was really good, because we had teachers, associates, we had all of our administrators were there, our superintendent, directors of elementary and secondary ed, and it was really interesting. Again, that you need to have people attend those, and you need to let people know that you're school counselors, and make sure that people know that school counselors have a role in the school, because I think, like I said, we a lot of times haven't been very vocal on some of those things. So if there is a chance to ask questions, go up and introduce yourself and ask a question having to do with school counseling, because we just need to make sure that we're also being represented. And then the last one is just read the ISCA advocacy alerts during the session, and they'll start coming in January, and hopefully if there's things that you need to do during that time, to please do those. So these next slides, I think I'm not gonna go through a lot of those, because I think some of the people, I'd rather kind of maybe spend some time talking more about some of the issues. But just if you really haven't, or you need some pointers on how to contact your legislator, there's some good bullet points here. Just keeping it brief, making sure you identify yourself and what you do, and then get to the point. Don't talk about a lot of other stuff, but make sure you mention the specific bill. And then the next one is just relate it to home. Make sure they understand your position. And this is all stuff too from the National Education Association website, because they're experts at this kind of thing. I was fortunate enough, thank you Cindy Swanson, to go out to Washington DC a couple years ago and just learn how to talk to legislators, and how to be specific, and how to make sure you're staying on point. And one of the things in the related to home column right at the end, they're going to remember stories, and they're going to remember specific samples and examples. So have some specific things. I know the last couple of years when we've gone to visit the Hill Day or talk to any of the legislators, I have shared that, the mental health situation in our schools has, increased, or that students with mental health issues, that those students have, it's increased so much in the last couple of years, that we have students that are hospitalized at least once a week. We are dealing with, students who are suicidal at least once a week. And, when you actually make a story, or, share something that's actually happening, I think they listen a little bit more, and they really do have, again, so you just have some data to support the things that you're talking about. And then make sure your message is on point with focusing on students too, and trying to, that last one, avoid language that sounds whiny or negative. And that is so critical, because I think, again, especially school counselors, I get so sick of hearing, well, you guys are so busy, and you have so much on your plate. That's true, but you have to focus as a school counselor on, hey, not sounding like, oh, I'm so busy. You have to focus on the students, and talking about, how that relates to a certain bill, or a certain thing that's being debated, because they don't care about how busy we are or anything like that, and we need to really focus on the most important thing. So then just the last couple, allow for some follow-up, make sure you give them some information, and then address your letter correctly. There's a link on there from the Iowa Legislative website that you can use to do that. And then avoid informal language. Make sure, again, it's very serious. Make sure you are polite in your demands. That's hard sometimes, especially with some of the things that have been going on, but try to keep it as polite as possible, because it's just like anything else. If you're rude, they're not going to listen to you, and they're not going to even read it. So make sure you include your address and your zip code. The last couple of years I've sent emails to all of the legislators, and a lot of them I'll get specific replies back, even though I'm not a constituent in their district, but they'll still email me back, and I really appreciate that. And make sure you always thank them, because I mean, it is a job that is very difficult. So those are just some things to kind of keep in mind when you are talking to the legislators. So I don't know if I'm going to give Robert another chance if he's available. If Robert's, are you there? He must not be able to talk. What about Jim Obradovich? Okay.
Robert, I see that you have your hand raised. If you can type in, if we can't hear you, type in the question box.
Is he writing anything?
I don't know. Go ahead and keep going. And if he says, if he pops up anything, I'll let you know.
Okay. Well, hopefully, because I really want them to share some of the things too. So this next slide is just, again, contact your legislator, and there's different email addresses and different places where you can find that. Oh, this next slide I think is really important. I think this is one we want to spend a little bit more time on, because this is what Sue Shermer from Heartland AEA talked about at our conference. And then we recently got this email from her, again, reminding us of all the things that are going on right now in the state, and how we need to make sure, number one, that we are aware of this, and then also that we are focusing on our school council role and doing what we're going to do, because these things are really important, and we've been asked to come to the table, and now we need to just make sure we follow through. And Sue Shermer isn't able to join us, but she did leave a message, and I think she's talked about how hopefully our priorities can also come out of here, especially the things that are going on with the Future Ready Iowa recommendations that came out in October. So we'll talk about that in a little bit, but we just need to make sure that, again, that everybody's aware of this and doing what they need to do. So the first one, the House File 2362, is the whole career and academic plan, where the 4-year plan and what you do with your students after that for career development, and trying to figure out for exploration of careers and college things. If you're not on that committee as a school counselor, you need to be on that committee, and you need to be working with your district and having a say in those kinds of things. I know there's a lot of schools that are also doing some really cool things in their classes or in their curriculums. We started a program called CAPS, where students actually are gone for half a day, and they're working in different like businesses and doing projects, and really getting some good career experiences and things like that. So I know there's other schools that are doing that. The second one, the MTSS process, is gaining traction in schools. We've always done with this is what we've always done with implementing an ISCA program. So if your schools aren't doing the ISCA program, I know a lot of schools across the state are doing the school counselor academies with Sue Shermer, but if you're not, the ISCA program is also, we're going to be doing ISCA is going to be doing some webinars on the folks that have done RAMP, and so you need to be looking at that too. Plus, you need to just making sure that you're doing the same thing, or doing the things that you need to do as a school counselor. So okay. And then the early warning system to detect struggles and provide interventions. I'm not real familiar with that. If somebody wants to come on, if they're more familiar with that, you can do that. And then strength and growth of PBIS programs, also, because those are huge things that are going on in our schools that counselors need to be involved in, and making sure they're doing the right thing in those programs too. Making sure you're not just the data collector, that you're actually a part of, you know, identifying and working on interventions, as well as, you know, not just doing the clerical stuff that's involved in some of those things. That Iowa definition of college and career readiness, and I think Dave Ford, if you are available, I know he's very much been involved in this because he's been one that helped write that. So I don't know, Dave, if you're on, if you're available, do you mind talking a little bit about the college and career readiness definition? Maybe he's not listening.
Yep, no, I'm listening. I'm just making sure I was unmuted.
Okay, well, and then Dave, too, if you don't mind, because the other one is the Iowa AEA Post-Secondary Readiness and Equity Partnership, that AEA Prep. Do you mind kind of talking about both of those, and then we'll, you know, go back to the Future Ready Iowa stuff?
Yeah, absolutely, and I'll be real brief on both of them.
Perfect.
Okay, nope, that's okay. I just want to make sure my I had to move away from my computer and I'm on my phone because I wasn't getting good audio on there. So yeah, so here's the brief version of the college and career readiness definition. Been put together, adopted by the State Board of Education in August of 2016. It kind of lost some steam, to be honest, because the person who was responsible for that work was Mary Della Gardella, and she passed away shortly after that was approved by the State Board of Education, and sat for quite a bit of time afterwards. I think Future Ready Iowa has picked it back up with some traction. It was included in the state ESSA plan that was submitted, and I do know that one of the next tasks coming out of the Department of Ed will be to define some benchmarks and indicators for each of those 4 buckets, if you will, of those college and career readiness, each of those 4 colors there. And then I believe the code states that 8% of the school report card formula, there'll be an index created that college and career readiness, whatever that turns out to be, will be 8%, or maybe it currently is 8%. And this new index may replace that. I'm not 100% sure, and I don't know that that decision's been made, but this definition is pretty tightly aligned with, if you look at ACT's holistic framework, it's the same 4 areas. If you look at David Conley's college and career readiness definition. So generally speaking, you can look across all the literature and find that people are looking at all 4 of these as ways students are college and or career ready when they graduate from high school. So I think we're seeing a lot more traction coming out of each of these 4 areas. And I'll lead that right into the just a very brief overview of what AEA Prep is, because that group kind of has as its task, the beginning of that obviously is post-secondary readiness, which we chose as a word intentionally because it's really everything that encompasses life after high school, where folks sometimes get bogged down in the language of college and career means 4-year college or going right to work. Whereas post-secondary education and training is a little more broadly defined here. So, but anyhow, that group is looking to figure out what can we do to scale up around the state, support for school counselors and school districts in each of these 4 areas, provide professional development and training to K-12 schools, and create partnerships with higher ed so that students are best prepared to transition and be successful in those types of programs after they graduate, because currently the data would show us that students are not only not prepared, and we have evidence of that, they're not being very successful when they do get there in some areas. And it's pretty easy to predict which students will be successful in which location. So part of that group will have as its charge of closing some of those equity gaps, and not only for students, but also geographically around the state. We've talked often about, you know, if you're in Heartland and Sue is your school counselor contact, you're golden because you have her in your fingertips. Yes. She's tied into everything, but that shouldn't just be a benefit if you choose to work in Heartland. So creating equity around all sorts of aspects of college and career readiness, and it has become the forefront of all 9 of the AEAs. So we've created a statewide partnership among the AEAs.
And that's one of our, you know, with the funding issue, you know, again, trying to get more funding for AEAs, because I know that's been one of the, you know, things talked about too in the educational world is AEA funding.
Yeah. And we met with the governor on Monday, Monday?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Monday. I get my days right here. And talked with her about everything that I just shared with you. So we shared very specifically some data that we've seen move as a result of some of this work, and why it's so necessary for us to scale this up. So I think that was kind of our pitch, like, listen, we know the budget situation. We're not coming in asking you for money when we know there's none to ask for. But we do want you to know what we're doing to support students in the state. These are a couple of key areas. This isn't the only area, obviously, that the AEAs are pursuing, but it was one that we wanted to highlight. And obviously losing, we're not asking for more funding, but losing funding would interfere with our ability to maintain what we've developed.
Mm-hmm. So
that, I was just going to say, the final thing I would say about PrEP is that one of the key things that it does is it will provide a pretty robust database to all of the schools in the district, including student-level FAFSA completion data to every high school in the state. Currently, that process requires students or districts to do something to get that data, and that will then just be deployed automatically to schools around the state through their AEAs.
That'll be nice. So do you see anything, Dave, too, like with the legislative session is mostly just any words of advice or any suggestions for us as a, ISCA on how you think, this relates?
Well, judging by who's going to be in control of things, I would say any way to connect anything to Future Ready Iowa will get traction, and anything that you don't connect to Future Ready Iowa will likely not get traction, because those are the things that are the most important to the political party who's running not only a gubernatorial campaign, but other campaigns around the state in an election year. And I don't know that anybody would argue with the fact that I think Future Ready Iowa is her primary platform for this election.
Yes, and so if you haven't heard of the Future Ready of Iowa, and I know that ISCA has sent some emails out about it, and Amy Hospodarski, our president, was actually, I think, part of that committee.
She was part of the alliance. Yep.
The alliance, and she has shared. Again, counselors are mentioned in the recommendations quite often, so we need to make sure that again we're following through on that, especially there's five recommendations. The fourth one, it really talks about, early academic and career development and delivery approaches so all students are prepared for a changing world. But I think that's what, and I apologize because Jim and Robert are both on. This is the first time we've had them do a webinar. So they're both on phones. And I don't know, Britt, if you can help get them to be able to talk because they can hear us. But
I'm working on it.
Okay, thank you. But Jim's texted me and he said too that the Future Ready Iowa is going to be a huge issue, and that we need to, that we need to keep an eye on that and make sure that some of the things, because about all the recommendations, but there's not any funding, like Dave said, too, for it. So there could be some definite bills or things that come out of that. So yeah, and I don't know, like the Future Ready Iowa. I don't know, Dave, if you're
we have a really good opportunity to do a couple of things. One of them would be to develop a position paper out of ISCA's position on Future Ready Iowa as it relates to the profession of school counseling and student outcomes. I think that would be wise. I would target very specifically the items that are in there, in the role or the position that ISCA is, and its membership is into it.
You're kind of cutting in and out.
One of those oh, I'm sorry. Give me just a second. I'll be back on my Wi-Fi here in about 15 seconds.
Okay, because this is really good stuff, and you're kind of cutting in and out. Yeah.
Give me about 15 seconds here. I'll be right back in.
Okay, perfect. But I think for the other people too, if you haven't looked at that or that college and career, or I'm sorry, the Future Ready Iowa stuff, make sure that you're familiar with that. And I think, we'll be doing some more stuff with that. So, And Jim just texted me and said too that they have already talked to the governor's staff about, the Future Ready Iowa stuff. And again, that's the lobbyists are our voice, to make sure that counselors are always being represented with that.
We should be able to hear Robert now. Let's give it a try. Maybe.
Robert? Maybe not.
Okay, well, he did just send in some information, so I'll read that.
Okay.
Attend your local legislative coffee. They are almost always held on a Saturday morning in each legislative district. This gives you the opportunity to ask questions of your area's legislators and/or speak with them personally. Another suggestion, when you write to your lawmaker, certainly use email, but also write letters. Hard copy and mail them. The letters and notes stand out in this day and age. People realize it takes greater dedication to sit down and write or type a letter and send it to them. And then Dave's back whenever you're ready for him.
Okay, and just to go on that too, you might want to always remember to use your home email when you're doing your legislative communication. I know that's been a recommendation. But yeah, those are really good things. I know they said, one of the things in that slide said, the formal things are okay if you're in a really big rush, but they're not going to get read as much as more personal ones, and especially writing. So, yeah. And then again, but these are the things that, when you're writing about Future Ready Iowa and some of the recommendations as a school counselor, if you mention that, I think that's going to, get some more traction this year. So Dave, are you back?
Yeah.
Good.
I think kind of where I'd left off was the idea that having ISCA develop some position statements, specifically on the Future Ready Iowa recommendations that address school counseling, would be one. I know that there has been some conversation very loosely, and I've heard it in a few different circles, of expanding House File 2392 to go from 812 to K12. And that's in the recommendations. So I think if you were to really kind of parcel it out, the requirement that all schools have a K-12 school counseling program and that counseling programs cover career, I think some folks would say that's already in there and it's just not happening, and it's a compliance issue at the DE level. So I don't know that that would turn into legislation, but again, I think in this political climate for this particular legislative session, one of the things that we heard at the governor's office on Monday was the partisanship has clearly created a lot of antagonism in these conversations, and being clever in terms of how we approach things. Everyone's going to be complaining about funding. That's going front and center. But trying to squeeze in some things to show that there are some things that we do align with, that we support, would, I think, do a lot of PR wonders, not only for the profession, but it would kind of get us out in front on a lot of these Future Ready Iowa things that are specifically related to counselors. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that I have any ideas how to do that, but I think attaching ourselves to some specific components of that would, as part of a position paper or position statement, would be beneficial to the membership and to the profession. Because it's going to come out one way or the other. We can either say this is what we're willing to do or not. We'd had a couple of meetings with a group recently, and there was some debate about should we introduce some legislation around counselor PD, and what we landed on was the idea that this is not the right climate to be introducing legislation. It's because you're careful what you wish for. But certainly here are some things that we can and are willing to do that you can have a little more control over.
Well, and that's what, like I said before, and that's, that first priority of ours that, and I know I sound like a broken record, but school counselors, you have to be doing school counselor work and not, some of the other things, and making sure that your program aligns with, the ISCA, model, and doing things that are with this. So just, when you were talking, Dave, even thinking about, I know Amy Verbilia, I don't know how to pronounce her last name. Yeah, and she's not with the legislation, but she's a Department of Education person. But even, you know, if your school is doing some of these career kinds of things, you know, maybe inviting, you know, like I know she had talked to me a couple weeks ago and had gone out to Earlham to see their career, the career fair that they had. And so I know we're doing next week an apprenticeship kind of thing. And so I said, well, come to Cedar Falls and see what we're doing. But maybe that's something too with legislators. If you're doing things, you know, maybe they could come. I mean, like I said, I know it's during the session, they're not going to be able to come unless it's on Friday. But those are kind of things that, you know, we need to let them know what we're doing so that, you know, they fit in with some of those recommendations. So that Future Ready Iowa stuff is really, really important, I think. And that's where we can, you know, hopefully, you know, really get involved and kind of make sure that school counselors are a part of that and doing, you know, doing the right work. So I don't know, does anybody else have questions or any ideas? I know, like, if Cindy Swanson, if you're on, I know, you know, to maybe share anything, because she's real involved with ISCA and some ideas about.
Hi, Susan, I'm on. Sorry, I'm echoing now. Melissa just stepped out, but she'll be back in, and I'll ask if she has any updates for us.
Oh, good. Because, yeah, I think, like I said, yeah, just being very prepared and being, you know, willing to step up and do some of these things would be really good.
Hey, Susan, can I ask a question while we're waiting?
Yes.
And I'm not being overly critical. I'm just noticing it as I'm looking here. So one of the things that I saw was try to avoid sounding kind of whiny in some of the requests.
Yes.
And part of me wonders if continuing to pursue the title thing is going to come across, because I feel like it's been something that's been addressed statewide a couple of different times. And are they going to look at that as, when are they going to put this issue to rest? As opposed to looking at it as putting it more closely at the front and center of clarifying the role and function of the school counselor primarily and the title secondarily, as opposed to the other way around. I mean, obviously those are things that were approved by the board, but you know, I think
But I thought of that even as I was reading them out there, and I thought of that too, actually, that maybe they should be switched around, that the role of school counselor should be first, and then with the name thing, because I do think the name thing is important, but you know, that is something that, yeah, is in the Iowa Department of Education, and you know, it's been officially changed, but switching that around, I think, could be more a positive way to look at it. Yeah,
I mean, if I'm in a school, if the superintendent and the principal understand the role and the function and they use them appropriately, I don't care what they call them.
Yeah, that's a good.
I'd rather them do that than call them the right thing and still use them the wrong way.
Yep. Yep. No, I think that's a good idea. That's a good idea. Well, I'll bring that up.
Because some of that's going to come back to tying into the Future Ready Iowa recommendations of how are counselors going to be ready to answer the call to support students' college and career planning efforts through an appropriate role, function, and use of school counselors. And then the study that we put out supports that statement. You know, so ISCA kind of has its own evidence, so to speak, or its own research to support that claim. One of the things that we heard, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, was when some of this stuff was coming out, is the reason that we're going to create these, I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago, there was talk about the intermediaries, and they were going to create funding to provide people in school to do this because, quote, school counselors were not interested in or trained in or interested in getting training and helping students with their career plans. That came out of the DE.
Yeah.
And when we shared that with the governor the first time several years ago, her response to us was, then I would go out and do your own study and collect your own evidence if you think counselors do it. And that's kind of where that study got started in the first place.
And that's where, you know, I've heard so many times again is that, well, you know, school counselors are so busy, so that's why we need to have other people come in and do those things. And, you know, and again, you know, Trish Hatch always talks about the silos and you know, everybody's working in silos, but you know, like you know, for example, our counseling office, you know, we have the mental health counselor comes here and works out of our office. The intermediary comes in and works out of our office. We have a counselor admissions off, from Hawkeye comes in once a week and he works out of our office. So they're doing those things, but they're still out of our office. So, they might be taking some of the things away from us, but we're still doing the counselor things and they're just helping us. So I think those are things that we really need to, highlight and let people know, how to make sure and use the resources available appropriately. That's really good too. Yeah, that's really good.
Susan, this is Cindy again.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm echoing like this. I just want to remind people that are ISCA members can come to our legislative conference on January 19th and 20th. We're still taking registration for that.
Yes, I am signed up. Yeah, so if you're an ISCA member, you can sign up for that, and that's really cool because they bring in some of the legislators and they give you, again, the information, what are some of the hot topics and stuff, and give you great information on how to, represent, different groups. And I'm sure that the Future Ready Iowa will be a topic there too, with just education in general, maybe in some of those kinds of things. Yeah. So I think we'll move on, but this is a huge thing that now, especially, the Future Ready Iowa. So if you haven't made yourself familiar with that, make sure you're looking at that. And I think, it's given me some ideas on what we can do even. And thank you, Dave, for your suggestions, because I think those are really good. And I'm going to take those back to the board. So just the last couple slides, I know we got about 15 minutes left, and they just got a couple more slides. And if there are specific questions, and I really apologize that Jim and Robert can't come on, because that was going to be a huge part of the webinar, was having the lobbyists talk and share some things. But like I said, they have email, things. That one of the things that I've learned through the last few years is when we're like working with the lobbyists and with the legislators, is I think people get very overwhelmed with, oh my gosh, talking to those people and stuff. And that's one of the things that it really isn't as hard as you think. And once you've done it a while, it's just like anything, it gets easier. But it's, so many schools are doing good things, and I think highlighting those schools and making sure that we're letting people know that what our role specifically is in the career development and the other things, that it's just not that hard. I mean, we can do this and get it done. So this quote is actually Amy Hospodarski, and she was on the chronic absentee committee too, and so they were meeting today. But she wrote this quote, that's something she wanted to share at the webinar, and I think, again, it's the same thing we've been talking about, how making sure the role of the school counselor. And one of the other topics that I think will be brought up, and something that we need to focus on and that we can implement school counselors, is the mental health issues, because that's also an obviously very hot topic with the legislators. So we really have a lot that we can share about mental health issues, and that's another way that we can get in with the legislators and talking to them. But she, that last part, she talked about how, again, we do need to make sure that we're, balancing, the different kinds of things, and making sure people aren't, people aren't saying to bring in other people to do our jobs, but making sure we're doing our jobs and understanding that appropriate role. So I just thought that was a really good kind of thing to slide to put in there. And then just, again, everybody has to step it up and speak up, because if we don't, then somebody is going to tell us what we should be doing. And then this was just like the last slide. Britt just sent out this email through the ISCA, and I thought, again, it just kind of wrapped it up, that we need to, Future Ready Iowa is one of the first things that we need to be aware of, and making sure that we're following along some of those things, review them. The professional development, making sure, again, that we are doing the things that we need to do, and like we're doing the academy, we're doing the school academy thing this year, and I tell you, it's not easy, because it's just so it's 4 days out of the building, but it's something that will benefit us in the long run. So you really need to do those professional development activities, and like the webinars. Thank ICANN and Britt, because those are some really good things to help people. And just other, ISCA, if you're a member of ISCA, they provide great webinars and a lot of good things. The ISCA, the PD through the ISCA is really not good. The Safe Schools PD, I mean, those are great opportunities to, stay on top of what's going on and making sure that, you recognize, what some of the issues are. So make sure you're doing that. And then the last one, the advocacy, again, making sure that we're communicating, the lobbyists are available to us. We're working on a little bit, on our website and making sure too that there's information for them, and if you have things that you want to talk to them about, they're available to talk to you, and they can again help. If you can't come to visit the Hill Day, you can bring your group a different day. They can help set up appointments and making sure that you're talking to people, especially if you're bringing students. That scholarship, just putting in a plug for the scholarship to make sure students if they're applying for that, if anybody, has, I don't even know how much money we collected at the conference, but that's another way to advocate. Elections, if you know folks who are willing to run for those elections, we need good people, and those are, right now, ISCA is, at such a great point. We've got, I think, 700 members or so, and our conference is going great, and, we've got a lot of things going on that we need to really stay on top of it. So, this, and just, you remember we've changed that membership. So if you haven't renewed your membership, to make sure and do that right now, because they're going to start that, I think, and run it from January to December. So just some of the other things, like I said, the funding obviously is huge. The mental health, IPERS, and I know SAVE, those are a couple things that are also going to come up that aren't totally related to counselors, but they affect counselors, obviously. So just to kind of, stay up on that a little bit. But the mental health, I think, like I said, is another thing that we need to really be ready to share stories and be ready to, tell what's going on in the schools. Because I mean, I've heard from all over the state, and I know here, in our building too. I said we've had more students with situations in mental health, and it's affecting academics, it's affecting just all kinds of things, attendance issues, all that kind of stuff. So that's what I have for the webinar, and I really appreciate, again, you guys that shared some
We have a
things.
couple questions.
Good.
So Robert wanted to reiterate Susan's comments that they are definitely available to the ISCA membership, and that they would also be excited to hear from members, because members would be a great help to them in understanding the sometimes complicated issues that school counselors face. So they encourage members to connect with them. And then we have a question about the expectations that ISCA and the ISCA membership have for the Capital Group. They want to know, do we have outcome expectations for the Capital Group? What is expected of them, and what specifically are we hoping that they will accomplish? Is it measurable, et cetera, of their work?
So we have a contract with them, with the specific things that we do, and collecting data kind of things, data driven counselors. We don't have anything set up as specifically for the different kinds of data, but I can tell you, in the last few years, we've gotten a lot more information, and getting our school counselor role out there. So I'm not quite sure what else, what exactly, maybe a little bit more information, but I mean, if there's, we definitely have, have things going on. Any other questions or comments or suggestions? All right. Well, again, I appreciate all of you for hanging in there and be ready to go in January and make sure that we get our voice heard and you know, get things going out there. And I wish you all a good holiday and a good break if you're celebrating, and if you're not, just hopefully a nice break to take some time to re-energize and get ready for 2018. So thank you again, and Britt, I will turn it over to you to.
All right. Well, thank you to those that were able to join us live. Thank you to Dave and Robert for your participation, and we will have this information up on the website for others to access at a later date. And if you are viewing this as a recording, feel free to reach out to ISCA, to Susan, to the lobbyists at any point with any questions that you might have. And thank you again, and have a great break, everyone.